want to. Okay, so I'm going to pass you over to Gary Heseltine, and he's going to give you a talk about media and changes on politics and UFOs. So, but before we do that, just to let you know that you don't have to rush off at the end. It's not like we've got to get everyone out or anything, so you can continue your lovely chats and everything until the early evening, okay? And you will do it for Q&A as well. Okay, so I know that you've all connected and you're having a great conversation, so don't feel that has to stop as soon as this talk's finished, okay?
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This is an awfully big muffed microphone, which feels like it's going to attack me, so can you all hear me now? Yeah. Do I need a microphone in a small room like this? Yes. Do I? All right then. Okay. All right. When you're ready, ladies and gentlemen, just take your seats. Whilst the doors will be closed and you will get shot for not attending earlier. Are we ready? Ladies? Coats off? Seated nicely? Right, okay. Stick your hand up. I'd like to have a bit of interaction with the audience first. Please leave. No, I know it. You're looking really vulnerable, like a rabbit in headlights there. So I thought, well, I'm going to pick on this lady. My apologies. No, right. Quick straw poll. How many of the people in the room, stick your hand up, who've never heard of me? Well, that's quite a lot of you, and I'm really going to cry now. There you go. All right, so how many people in the room, and be honest, and I don't need you to relate what they are, but please not talking over you two, I've been watching you. Right, stick your hands up if you've ever had any kind of UFO experience, sighting or whatever. Stick your hands up, but don't be shy, I'm not going to come back and question you. So, obviously quite a lot. I would imagine there's about, thank you, put your hands down, about 60 people in the room, perhaps maybe 30 of that had had some kind of experience. And I would guess that probably the fact that you'd had an experience probably is the principal reason you attend these kind of events. It tends to be the catalyst for you to delve into this subject, and that's understandable. But there's obviously 30 people in the room who've not heard of me, and really, in a sense, that's a failure of communication on my part and on the subject's part, because realistically I'm one of the leading people in the UK, one of the top researchers in the world, so if you're interested in the subject, you should have kind of known this. But it helps me to gauge your knowledge and how I structure the lecture as we go on. If you're a really knowledgeable audience, I will adapt in a certain way. If you're not so knowledgeable, I will explain things more, because some things will go over your head if you don't have a basic knowledge of the subject. Now, before I actually go into my presentation, which is called UFOs, or ET, the Media and World Politics, which is a brand new presentation, only finished yesterday. Right, so you're the first guinea pigs for it, so it'll be interesting to see how it goes down with you. Right, but before I do so, for those people who aren't aware of me, my name is Gary Heseltine, and in 2002 I launched an unofficial national database for British police officers to report UFO sightings and to collate British UFO reports. I started with 6 cases involving 10 officers. By the time I'd retired, it was well over 400 cases involving over 900 British police officers. And now, in 2015, it's over 500 cases in over 1,000 British police officers. Okay, so that's how I became known within UFO circles. And something along the way, I began to be asked to do lectures, and since 2010 I've lectured internationally. Various countries around the world, Australia, New Zealand, Belgium, Brazil, whatever. A very unexpected journey for me, because it's not something I ever anticipated doing. But that's what happened. I retired from the police after 24 years in March 2013. I retired 6 years early and gave up a well-paid job to go into this murky, poorly paid profession of trying to raise a UFO magazine. Why? Because something compelled me that it was the right time to try to reach the people in the street. To a certain extent, I'm not trying to reach the people in this room, for the simple reason is that the people in this room have already had the self-awareness to look at the subject, have an open mind and attend, and take the criticism of their friends who think they're all UFO nutters. Yeah? And that's the stigma attached to the subject, which we'll talk about actually in my lecture. So really, something compelled me to launch an online magazine that launched in April of 2013. The first issue didn't actually come out until June. It's bi-monthly, it's 96 pages. Now, all the people in this room could be subscribers. One or two have signed up today. But there's something a bit different. If you're interested in the subject of UFOs, where do you get your best information from? We'll talk about it in the lecture, and most people will say, well, the internet. And they become armchair experts because they've got a million websites to look at. And we'll talk about the effect that creates. It creates terrible apathy. And so you people have actually managed to, on a lovely Saturday afternoon, to forego their families, shopping or whatever, to come to the countryside, to come to see this is very good for you, because you've obviously taken the time that you want to explore the subject more. Okay, now all I'm saying is I can't make you get the magazine, but what makes it a little bit different? Over the last 13 years of my research, I've met everybody who is anybody, researcher-wise, in the field of ufology, and many of them have become friends, associates. Yeah? Now the ones I really respect, I've gone back to when I launched the magazine and said, will you write columns for free? No money. Everybody contributes columns for free. Alright, nobody gets paid. For a magazine that I'm going to create. It's going to be 96 pages, it's bi-monthly, and the idea is that the best UFO researchers come together under one publication and keep updating you with their work. Now that seems to be a sensible way to do any subject, is to get the best people together. So the likes of Stanton Friedman, Richard Dolan, Steve Bassett, Grant Cameron, they've all written for the magazine. A.J. Javard from Brazil, Bill Chalker from Australia. And what I want to do is create an online international magazine. That's why we've got columnists from South America, Brazil. We've got columnists from Denmark, Norway, all English speaking, the US, Canada, because I want to make it an English speaking worldwide magazine. And what makes it a little bit different, before I then go into my lecture, is something that nobody else will ever do. Who would give a third of their profits away? Well, that's what I do, because I make a pledge that makes it a little bit different. I want to change the way people view the subject. Because of my police background, I want to educate people and try to bring people into this self-awareness stage that in many ways you're already at. Alright, and the way I think to do that is to talk about the pilots. Everybody can associate with a pilot. Radar operators, air traffic controllers, credible people, high caliber witnesses involved in incredible things. Often witnessed by multiple officers, multiple radar, things like that. Credible cases, because that's how you construct your argument. Is ET here? Is it real, or is it, oh well, deluded and living in cuckoo land? Well, I don't think we are, and I'll go into that in the lecture. But that's the idea. A third of all monies that comes into the magazine through subscriptions is automatically ring-fenced for UFO causes. All right? Now, in the short term, and what it's already done, is it's funded 2 magazine conferences, international conferences where we bring speakers over. There is a 2-day international conference in Holmfirth in West Yorkshire, where I'm from, in September. So if anybody's interested in that, look at the magazine website. It's a lovely area, Holmfirth, last of the summer. But let's look at the calibre of the people. Stanton Friedman is a nuclear physicist, worked on the Gemini space program, worked for Westinghouse and all the major corporations. He became, and what is now arguably, the senior and most famous UFO expert in the world. He's been lecturing on UFO since 1970, believe it or not. He's now 80 years old, but he's as sharp as a button, and he's a brilliant lecturer. He's coming over. It's very rare he comes over to the UK. So if you really know Stanton Friedman, he is a legend, and then you should try to get to that conference. There still are tickets available. 50% of tickets are sold, but with 5 months to go, there's still 48% left. All right, so have a look at that. Go to the magazine website. I'll leave some business cards. If anybody wants a website at the end, take one away and inquire. All right? But think about that. UFO causes, I want to make a difference. I'm not in it for the money. I've never been motivated by money. Yes, it's nice to have some on a rainy day, but basically, as long as I've got enough to feed myself, put a roof over my head, that's all I'm bothered about. Yeah? I want to try to make a difference to the public. And if you buy into the concept of the magazine by subscribing, your part of that subscription helps me generate cash, so then I can, as I've already talked to the people here who own this building, is to have a UFO conference down here, a magazine conference in this room. We'll do a day conference in here. Because that, for the people who live more down south, can't get up north. So there's all these possibilities. All right, let's go into the lecture. So that's for you to ponder about, but just these are some of the front covers. Okay. And that's been running now. Well, there's 11 issues out, and the 12th issue is out, due out at the end of April, and I'm just putting that together now. Okay, so if you are interested, it has a regular update on your British sightings, a regular update on world sightings, talks about the latest developments in space and science, but it's predominantly UFO. Top researchers. So if you want to get your knowledge, get it from the people that are actually doing the work, rather than the load of useless, bogus websites that tell you stories and nothing more. All right? Okay, enough of the self-publicity there. But it's important because of the pledge that we can make a change if we generate money. Okay, ET, media, world politics. Okay, now this is probably might go over some people's heads in the room if you've never really attended a conference before or whatever. But that is what I'm going to talk about. The modern era is popularly referred to since it begins with 1947, with the Kenneth Arnold sighting of 9 objects over Washington State between 2 mountains, skipping along. That's how the term flying saucers was coined. Water, pebble being thrown like a flying saucer. He described it, and that's how the term was coined. And then 2 weeks later, I would think everybody in the room has heard of the word Roswell. Yeah? So even if you're not interested in the subject of UFOs that much, because it's been popularised on television, people will have heard of the word Roswell. There was a crash of something. I believe it was a UFO, ET craft, but it's a very amazing incident, and it is a seminal moment in the modern era. Okay, now what happened was initially, when UFOs started turning up, and this isn't just in America, worldwide, the media actually reported quite faithfully what was going on, because they were curious too. What is this new phenomenon? We want to know. You know, is it a secret weapon from the Russians or whatever? There was genuine interest, and the press was essentially free to report accurately. But then something happened, and this is significant. It's a bit of a history lesson, this, before we jump forward to modern time. In 1948, a year after Project Sign, which was the first US Air Force official study of UFOs, so the US Air Force studying cases from around America and overseas, but mainly American cases. After a year, they did a report. It's called the Estimate of the Situation. And it concluded that after studying about 1,200 cases, that the likely origin was interplanetary. That was the term of that era, instead of extraterrestrial or whatever, or aliens, it was interplanetary. Okay, and basically, they took that report and showed it to General Vandenberg, and he said, well, I ain't having that. Destroy all the copies. We're not having that. I can't take that to the president. Because unless you've got the craft in front of him, which borders back onto a question there about Roswell, because he should have known about it if it was. But basically, he said, I'm not taking that to the president, We haven't got definitive proof. Destroy all copies. But we know one copy survived because Edward Ruppelt, who wrote a very famous book called The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects in about 1956, he ran the book for about 2.5 years, and he actually said he saw a copy of it. So one copy had survived, so we know it was a real document, and it had concluded that the UFOs were interplanetary. But as a result of Vandenberg saying, can't take that to the President, destroy all copies, there was a significant change in the attitude of the people who were working for the US Air Force. And basically what they did was that they got rid of all the staff who were on, or pretty much all the staff who were involved in Project Sign. They then changed the title to Project Grudge. I don't know if that's a pun, but basically at that point there, they then decided to start debunking and belittling every report that came in. So it had to be anything else other than unknown, anything else other than interplanetary. So it had to be a mirage, atmospherics, mistake, that kind of thing, genuine error. So that's really when the debunking area begins, is post-1948. But for a few years, the media still were very interested. One of the more prominent figures is this guy, Major Donald Kehoe. Now, he was a US Marine Corps, and because of his rank and because I think he'd been to West Point at some point, military academy, he knew a lot of very high-ranking military people. And they would keep telling him that there were some fantastic sightings. He was told about the estimate of this situation report, that it was interplanetary, and yet he'd seen how the staff had been replaced, and it was now, can't be, so it isn't. Can't be ET, we can't have that. So they were just labelling anything to get rid of it. It's Venus, it's swamp gas, the classic things that you've heard about. Major prominent figure, and he wrote a very important article for Life magazine, which was a popular magazine of the day, kind of like Cosmopolitan of the day, Vogue, that kind of thing. And it was a major sensation. And he wrote a book, Flying Saucers from Outer Space, in 1950, which became a huge, big bestseller. But it was all based on military, real cases that he was passed by many of his colleagues in the Air Force, the Army, the Navy. So if you can track these books down, he wrote 5, they're great books. Okay, because they contain a lot of real information. And a lot of the cases that a lot of people thought for a long time were made up. Well, actually no, various people have come forward, military, to confirm that everyone that he reported was accurate, because he was given access to many of these cases that nobody else was, because of his military background. So he became very prominent. He became, in a sense, what I'm trying to do now. I'm like a student of his, in a sense, because he thought we should tell the truth. If it is interplanetary, if that's what was concluded, we should be telling the world about this. And every time he got on the media, he was saying, look, they're lying, they're covering it up. I've got great reports from the Air Force, from the Navy, from the Army, and they're lying to you. And he would have his live transmissions cut off on radio, he'd have been misquoted. There was a very famous incident during a live TV broadcast, it was cut off on live TV because he was about to say that they were interplanetary, which bucked what the American authorities wanted to be heard. Similarly, in 1952, for those of you that are not aware, over 2 successive weekends, back-to-back weekends in July, multiple UFOs were seen over Washington, DC. And we're not talking just like a little sighting. This lasted 9 hours on the first occasion. And we know that this really occurred. This is not fiction, because Harry Barnes, who was the air traffic controller in the Washington Air Traffic Control, actually wrote about it and said these things came on radar, planes were sent up and then they would go invisible. But the popular press report that there was no visual sightings. There were some visual sightings. But when you hear it reported in the media now, there's none. And they're just trying to make it look like this was just a brief little sighting. This lasted for 9 hours. Can you imagine? UFOs zipping about your radar screens, You send up interceptors, and as soon as they get to the coordinates, no UFO there. As soon as the planes turn around and leave the area, the UFO suddenly reappear and they're zipping all over the screen. They're playing running ring trials. So a very credible guy, Harry Barnes, who's in charge of the air control tower, he's actually gone on record saying that these things were real. And in his opinion, he thought they were real. He didn't think this was temperature inversions. He didn't think this was just some mirage. He thought this was real. So that was a major incident. As a result of those 2 successive weekends and the way the press reported it accurately, based on the information that they had, then basically it caused a real clamour in the American media. We want to know what's going on. And General Sanford, this guy, was the guy who was going to chair the biggest press conference since the end of the Second World War. So the biggest press conference for 7 years, from 1945, and he chaired it. And apparently, the background to it, we know this from, again, the report on unidentified flying saucers by Edward Ruppert. He was ran Project Blue Book for about 2.5 years. He said that at that time, General Sanford was under real pressure and was split both ways. There were a lot of people in the military who wanted to say, yeah, let's come clean. Yeah, okay. We can't explain what's going on. This is ET, for want of a better word. But the other faction was, no, we want to keep it secret. We want to evaluate it more, want to keep it secret. And in the end, he decided to go down the line of secrecy. So he basically fronted that conference and basically said, yeah, there are some very extraordinary sightings, but as yet, there are very few that can't be identified, and we're sure that if we have a bit more information, we can explain them all away. And unfortunately, the press, because they didn't know any better, just accepted it hook, line and sinker. So generally, can't be lying to us. This is before the era of really politics and disinformation, which is a modern era, which is something that we're affected literally every day in the real world now, and not just UFOs, on everything. Okay, if you think of pharmaceutical companies, products and things like that, there's a lot of disinformation out there. So okay, so significant things happening. So after 1952, there was huge interest, and it nearly tipped the scale, and we nearly had disclosure, the modern word for telling the truth. But it was beaten off. And then to get rid of the problem once and for all, or to silence it, the CIA, bless them, all matter of public record, all the documents can be produced, then commissioned what has become known as what's called the Robertson Panel. A team of top scientists of the day from different vocations, brought in, none of them UFO experts in any manner, but brought in, and their sole purpose, and you can see and look at the Freedom of Information records, was to get together, and we must strip the aura of flying saucers, because people were thinking this is an invasion by ET. We're going to strip the aura of UFOs, the status it's got, and also we're going to engage with the media to dumb down the subject. And that is the real nail in the coffin for openness on the subject. So in 1953, when that panel concluded, that's when all our history of ridiculing the subject begins. Only 62 years ago. That's a lot, isn't it? It's a long time ago. That's when the media suppression begins. Who were the key player who made all these decisions? Well, it's often been said that whoever possesses any recovered extraterrestrial machine and they were able to harness its technology would become the most powerful country in the world. Let's go back to the Roswell Enigma again. Let's say they did get a UFO crash. They did capture a flying saucer, as was initially reported. They said a flying disc. A flying disc is not a flying balloon, this is a flying disc. Retracted a few hours later. Let's say they did recover a disc. If one crashed outside on the lawn now, we'd all go rush. What would happen is then the police would be called, then the military would be called, all get cordoned off. We weren't going to look in it, get taken away, get examined. That's what we would do. If it was Russian, that's exactly what we would do. Yeah? Let's say ET did crash in 47. What are you going to try to do? You're going to try to make that work. Why? Because it's come from somewhere else, it's travelled a long distance, and by God we can't do that, so let's try to harness that technology. How do you do that? You break it up into little bits, and you take it to industry, and you say, there you go, I want you to look at that little bit, I want you to look at that little bit, and you're not telling anybody what the other's doing, and it becomes compartmentalised. And this is how it works, special access programs. So you look at that little bit, you look at that bit, and everybody in this room, big companies of the day, we're all given bits and pieces. Try to make that piece of machinery work. Not told where it's from, try to make it work. And inevitably some would fail, some would, you know, get close, some might have actually succeeded. So when we talk about possibility of man-made UFOs, yes, I think there are some probably man-made UFOs. I don't think they're as prevalent and as common as what is reported because of the flight characteristics that we'll talk about later that make them ET, in my opinion. But yes, I think that's exactly what we would do. We would try to harness technology. And America, if they did have one, then became that country that would want to harness it. Superpower, we want to be the top dog. America, the world policeman. Well, we'll go down the political route. Maybe we shouldn't, because I don't think they do a great job as a world policeman. But anyway, they became the key player. They're the ones that in 1953, the CIA commissioned the Robertson panel to start the debunking era. So, at every, people may not be aware of this, but in every major UFO sighting, major one involving military or pilots, military pilots, around the world, guess who turns up? The Americans. They hand it all over to the Americans. They have consultations with the Americans. The Americans own the subject. Okay? So they are the key player. And they quickly adopted, it can't be so it isn't. So we must explain away every sighting. And if you think about why we're in this room now, and why it's not 1,000 people in this room, and how many people have you ever felt comfortable telling many people in your circle of lives that you've got an interest in UFOs? Do you feel comfortable? Or do you feel, ooh, I'm going to get ridiculed here? Has everybody ever felt that in this room? I would anticipate that most people have felt a little bit, well, like I said, but UFO, it's that kind of subject. But that started in 1953. Can you see that? And that, over the last 62 years, has been ingrained into your psyche. If you think about it, there are some people probably older than 62 in this room, but a lot of people will be under 62. So for those that are under 62, the whole of your lives has been in a suppressed area. So if you think about it, where do you get your information from? It comes from your parents when you're young, and then latterly it's media, television, newspaper, books, film. Now if all of that media is saying there's nothing to it, and it's, you know, it's a kind of a science fiction kooky kind of thing, without you ever looking at the subject, subliminally, you're going to grow up thinking there's nothing to it. Yeah, I've heard of flying saucers, but there's nothing to it. And that's been going 62 years. Think about that. You've been conditioned to believe that there's nothing going on. Alright? Okay? Because of Britain's special relationship with America, Britain became one of the most secretive countries in the world, with America being the most secretive government in the world on UFOs. Because we followed suit. We do everything what the Americans do. They tell us what to do, we follow suit. Okay? When that policy in 1953 was adopted, think about it, they put people in place who would infiltrate. This is what the CIA did. And this is all a matter of record, they started to infiltrate UFO organisations, NICAP, which was a huge one, full of military people, that ultimately was destroyed from within by people who were working for the government, really, who were debunkers, and they just changed it. But what they also started to do is they worked with the media. So they started to get reporters working, who were secretly working for the CIA, working as reporters in all the major newspapers. So eventually they get into key positions where they can affect change and influence policy. So if you think about this now, whenever you see something on the TV now, so if it's Britain's really bad still, but if you get something on the TV, well, I've appeared on BBC, on Look North. I'm from Yorkshire, so I've appeared on Look North a couple of times. And the first time I went there, the presenters are going doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. And if you notice when TV does this, they're doing it to deflect you, to bring the interest down, to make it comical. Now, why are they doing that? Would they do this with any other subject? Would they go to Tony Blair? Iraq, it's a false, it was you went in there under a sham. They wouldn't do that. You never did have the weapons. It was all made up. You never had the statistics. You just wanted to follow America. They don't do that, do they? But with UFOs, they've got to kind of label us. We've got to be the believers, the truthers, anything. The conspirators, that's how we got to. We're all labelled by society, and that label is a reflex to keep you under control. And by making you feel ridiculed, making you feel uncomfortable, then they're suppressing the subject. Can we not see that? And this is really what happens, and it's not just in UFOs. If you talked about 9/11, and I know a lot of 9/11 experts, and really as an ex-detective, I just want to look at the evidence. And the real story doesn't add up. And that's without putting any conspiratory aspect to it, but there should be a certain re-examination of all the evidence, and nobody will touch it. It's a closed shop, you can't touch it, it's a dirty word. Oh, no, it can't be, so it isn't. And that's what Stanton Friedman, the nuclear physicist who's coming over in September, that's one of his phrases. It can't be, so it isn't. But it's a good phrase. It can't be, so it isn't, so we've got to change it. Okay, so in a sense, if you remember the phrase military-industrial complex, where did that come from? It came from President Eisenhower, an absolute god in America, a legend, a real true American legend. And he said in his closing speech of his administration in 1960, we have to be wary of the military-industrial complex taking over. Well, guess what? His prophetic message took over, because we have lost control. And if, in a sense, we'll go back to Iran, Iraq and whatever, the debate about whether they had the weapons dossier and all that kind of thing, we know now that they never had the real evidence to go in. But they presented it as evidence. It was disinformation, and the public took it, the media took it, and it gave us the mandate to go into a war that shouldn't have been done in that way. All right? So what Eisenhower said in 1960 actually came true. We lost control to corporate big business, who were the real key players, the Bilderbergers of this world, the Rothschilds of this world. The key players who were not in governments, but the really key players. And we lost control to the intelligence services. And I don't think we can ever get it back, to be honest. But we have lost control, in my opinion. And the black budgets, are you aware that whenever America tries to work out its fiscal budget, they can never actually work it out. It never balances, because there's such a huge offset of black budget, not just for UFOs, but black budget money. They have no idea how much money is being siphoned off. Don't forget Air America, the film with Mel Gibson. That was drug running, CIA, putting up drug running companies, false companies. The National Inquiry was made by the CIA. It was a front for money. So, there's lots of ways, but the media went along with it. They worked with the media, they got people into the media to influence decisions. 62 years later, where are we now? Wow. Now the mainstream is divided. The world has changed because of the internet. And we now have what is termed the mainstream media, and in a sense the alternative or non-stream media. Can we all see that now? And it's often, people who are researchers in anything will talk about the mainstream. This is what you get from your national newspapers, from your BBC, your ITVs. That's the national establishment. Your CNNs, your NBCs, that kind of thing. But now, because of the internet, we have an alternative media. which is good in a sense, because it has less control. However, the internet can still be controlled. You remember when, say we went into Iraq, what do? Take out communications. Why do we take out communications? Because we want to stop broadband internet coverage, information getting out. Remember when China went into Tiananmen Square, they're trying to get communications cut, stop internet links. So there are still attempts. Cyber warfare is really on the increase. And really, there are methods. If you're going into a country, the one thing that you want to do is try to limit the access to the social media. Yeah, they're fighting at the end of our road. They're going to bomb us. They don't want that kind of information getting out. So there are still things that can be done to limit the internet. But with the internet, it's also created a number of things, which I'll talk about in a minute. But let's just talk about 62 years on. Can we prove that ET exists? Well, you've got to understand now, we have two worlds. We have the secret world, intelligence services, governments need to know, and we have the public domain. And we can only, and I, and you, unless you've got friends in high places, can only really deal with the public domain. Because we don't have the need to know, we don't have the access to these military secrets and whatever. So, I, as an ex-detective, I was a detective for 19 of my 24 years service, worked on murder, manslaughter, rape, I know what evidence is, what would stand up in the court of law. If I equate it in those terms, I can't present you the piece of UFO, the definitive piece, I wish I could. I can't show you the alien body that says, there you are, I told you so. So you have to rely on what's called the circumstantial evidence case, which is what the police do all the time at court. Because sometimes you don't have the body. Sometimes you don't have the murder weapon. Sometimes you only have pieces of the jigsaw. And as I like to describe the circumstantial evidence cases, if you have enough pieces of the jigsaw, the jury can then make a decision based on a compelling argument. So if we look at it in that way, when we look at over 2,000 military pilots who've gone on record, 3,000 commercial pilots, hundreds of radar operators, hundreds of sonar operators, hundreds of air traffic controllers, hundreds, thousands of military personnel over the years, all backed up by documentary evidence, the piece of paper that proves that happened, the statements that were put in, backed up by radar, often telemetry information. After 62 years from that 1953 decision, I am absolutely certain that we can draw a conclusion. And the conclusion is, ET is here. Might have been here for a long time, I don't know. But there's a good case, a very compelling case to say that ET is here. All right? Just to quickly go, that's Parvez Jafari, the Tehran incident. He was a military pilot sent up to intercept a UFO, diamond-shaped UFO. It tried to kill him. It sent a red object out from the back of it. On a collision course, he had to take avoiding actions. His weapons jammed. It lasted several minutes. Another aircraft was affected by electrical pulses that lost all its instrumentation. Classic case. Memorable photograph taken by Paul Trent, 1950. Now that photograph is one of two. There was two taken seconds apart. Has been analysed by top scientists around the world, and it was proved to be genuine. And it showed a disc of between 30 and 40 feet, and it was operating in the skies of 1950. So think about that. So there was something hardcore then. For those who were historical, Second World War, UFOs were seen, but they were referred to as balls of light and called a nickname, and they were seen in all theatres of war, the Pacific, the European War, and they were called Foo Fighters. But these Foo Fighters, they literally thought were the other side. Secret weapons, but at the end of the war, nobody ever concluded what they were. But there was a guy that studied them called Lincoln LaPaz, who was a scientist, and basically they weren't atmospheric. These planes would end up going in dogfights. Sometimes they were really small, the size of a small coin. Other times they were the size of a basketball. Other times they were the size of a car. But also during the war, 1942, a Lancaster bomber returning from a raid in Germany saw a 300-foot disc with a row of windows, and it flew alongside of them for 5 minutes and then shot off at speed. No turbulence, no air disturbance whatsoever. And they all came down. This was before anybody had heard the term flying saucers, UFOs. They reported it and they were told to keep quiet. Why? Who knows? Maybe to stop panic. Gordon Cooper there. Now this guy is one of the most famous American astronauts. Gordon Cooper, an American legend, part of the early, he was one of the people who were part of the first 7 picked for the Gemini flight space program, the pre-runner to the Apollo program. So he was an astronaut, top pilot, became an astronaut. He'd had several UFO encounters. And he went public and said, look, I know people, and because of who he was, people talked to him, and he says, these things are real, it's ET. And it would make a bit of the press, but he was basically just siphoned off. You know, only people who were like us, who were open-minded, would get a look in, but the national media, they'd report on it, it didn't make any difference. Lots of pilots, lots of notable people have spoken out. And that finally is just a clip of a telemetry screen, cockpit instrumentation from the famous Belgian sighting on over Belgium in 1990, 30th of March into the 31st. And basically 2 F-16s were in a dogfight for 75 minutes with an object that produced turns and accelerations in excess of 35 G. Do you know how much G our top stealth pilots can take? 11 or 12. Okay? So this is almost 3 times as much stuff. And at one point it approached 40 Gs. Instant acceleration, instant stop. Right angle turns. Amazing. And that's from the radar data, telemetry data, all factual material that you can produce in the court of law, just the same as if I got done for drink driving, they'd say breathe into this, I'd get arrested at the scene if I was positive, they'd take you back to a police station and say breathe into this intoximeter, bigger machine, and they'd get a printout saying, yeah, the level of alcohol in your blood is too much. That piece of paper would be held up in court and say, you're guilty. What's the difference with us having telemetry data that's bona fide, checked, also caught on 7 radar systems, different types of radar systems. So, circumstantially, you put all these very best cases together, I believe it's overwhelming, compelling. That's why I started the magazine. That's why I quit the police early, because I'm trying to make a difference and say, look, we've got to do something, because people are still being blinded, but with the internet, we can maybe try to change it. The downside to the internet. Can anybody, there's 2 major downsides to the internet. Put your hand up if you think you can think of 1 or 2 big things.
They call it TMI, too much information.
Yeah, that's one kind of, another one.
Google's dominating.
Right, think of it more simply.
There's a signal to noise ratio problem in terms of the quality.
You're thinking too specific. These are the 2 things that it means. All right, put your hands up, I've got to count it. That's what it creates, in this field. This is what it creates. It creates the armchair expert who goes onto a million websites, thinks he knows everything about UFOs, despite the fact that a lot of these websites are crap, bogus, no evidence whatsoever, no real detail. Well, they become the self-appointed UFO expert. Why do I need to go to a conference? Why do I need to engage with anybody? I've got it all at my doorstep. I don't need to sign up for a magazine. I know everything. Because you have got access to so much information. But it creates apathy. It's not just in UFOs. People do not demonstrate in the way that they did before. Ask any questions at the end, otherwise we'll be here till midnight. Okay? And the other thing, you get a major disconnect. Behind pornography, the second most searched term is UFO, alien, ET. Which means that there are billions and billions of people asking questions on the internet. But why aren't there billions of people supporting these events? Why are we scratching around for 50, 60 people? There's a major disconnect there. Why is there so many young people who are in an era where they're probably quite open to it through gaming? They don't attend conferences. Very few young people attend. I should say the average age in here, and I mentioned it before in Laughlin when I went to America, spoke in front of 700 people. I was shocked. Because at the end, this is the World Conference, the last World Conference in Laughlin, Nevada. 700 people in the room, but the average age was 55 plus. Now there's a major disconnect going on somewhere. We should have thousands, in millions of people, if there is that level of interest on the internet. But we don't see it. We scrat around trying to get 200 people to a conference. Doesn't make sense. Somewhere along the line, the message is being lost. And I think a lot of it's because of this apathy created by the internet. Like you say, too much information. It's stopping people. In the past, people were far more, if they disagree with something, they'd demonstrate, they'd march. We don't do that anymore. Unless you're in Tiananmen Square, and then you get killed. You see what I mean? So that's a major downside to the internet, and it affects this subject tremendously. Okay. Most people have heard of the word disclosure in relation to ET. Well, ET, is it near? Well, that's me giving testimony at the Washington Press Club, which is 2 blocks next to the White House. It's where Gorbachev, all the top presidents have spoken. I'm speaking at the same table, same lectern, and this occurred 2 years ago. And it was, I think, will be historically still a major event as time goes on, because it set the seeds for change in the modern era. Because basically what happened was 40 of the top researchers from around the world, including pilots, giving direct testimony, gave evidence before a panel of a retired senator and 5 retired congressmen and women with 80 years public service between them. And we gave evidence. We stood up and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and gave evidence. So when you're getting direct testimony from pilots, these congressmen and women were blown away by the testimony just after 1 day, and this lasted for 5 days. And what we're trying to get at the end of it is full congressional hearings that haven't happened in the United States since 1968. There is currently an ongoing thing called the Congressional Hearing Initiative, run by Steve Bassett, who's a major activist in America. Many of you will have heard of him. And they're lobbying now for that. And they also, that came out of it was, if we can try to get just one country to go to the United Nations and label a motion, we want to have a debate on UFOs. It happened once, a long time ago, with Grenada in 1978. But when he got deposed from power, the Americans basically said we don't draw attention to that anymore. But it's still on the statute book at the United Nations. So all it takes to re-energise that is one country saying, we believe in ET, we should have a factual debate all these years later. And that's what we're pressing for. So, who knows? People talk about disclosure as in, this is when Barack Obama stands up on the White House lawn and goes, we're going to announce that, yes, we're in touch with an extraterrestrial civilization. By the way, we knew about this 60 odd years ago, and yes, we lied to you, but we did it in the national interest. And that's going to be very difficult, we'll talk about it. Okay? In my opinion, we are moving closer to the level of disclosure, but it's not imminent. Not within years. But it is coming. And it has to come, and I'll explain why. What forces could cause disclosure? An admission by the US government? That's not likely. They don't want to rock the boat. A live world event. You're at the Olympics, billions of people watching, a UFO comes down over the stadium. That'd be a good one. Because it couldn't contain, they could cut the news like that, they could cut the news streams, the TV live streams, straight away. But the fact that you've got literally people recording it, you're going to get clips, all the people in the stadium who've got smartphones, you couldn't contain a world event like that. So that's possible, although probably unlikely. ET decides to show themselves and says, look, actually, we've got fed up with you not telling the world about us, we've been here for a long time. There we are. That's possible. New kids on the block. Now, this is the kind of scenario, right? What Steve Bassett in America worries is that because America has been the key player in all this secrecy, that if disclosure comes and it's done by another country, and they admit that actually we've known about it for 60 odd years, and we've lied to you for all these years, that America is going to get so much more extra flack. So Steve Bassett is hoping that at the point where a country like Brazil, because in South America the far more open, Brazil, Chile, Uruguay, they're very more open, military are open and say that they've studied it, it's ET, but this doesn't make the news over here, all right? That could be a key player in forcing Obama's hand. But I think it's this one that is the key to disclosure. And it's the boring one, really, because it's not exciting. Mainstream science said 2 years ago that they, through new radio telescopes that were coming online, that they were 20 years from getting an intelligent signal from space. Not just a random, this is an intelligent that they could say was extraterrestrial. So they set a clock running, actually 2 years ago, which finishes in 2033, hopefully within the majority of our lifetimes. Okay? So the clock is already running. So what's going to happen as we approach 2033? Well, that's what I'm saying. Years ago, when I was growing up, I'm 55 now, but when I was growing up, it was, yeah, there might be life in space. 20 years ago, yeah, there's probably life in space. 10 years ago, yeah, but almost certainly there's life in space. And now it's, yeah, it's any time now, we'll find out. So it's mainstream science is reporting this. This isn't underground ufologists reporting this clock. This is what's reported in the mainstream. And if the mainstream are saying that the clock is ticking, essentially if you take that 20 years, then you go until 2033. So something's got to change between now and 2033. With every passing week almost, new exoplanets are being discovered. What do I mean by that? Planets that are not too hot, not too cold, in a similar kind of band where the Earth is in relation to the Sun, not too hot, not too cold, the Goldilocks zone, as it's called. They're discovering them all the time. There's well over 1,000 exoplanets discovered already. So where are we going to be in another 5 years, 10 years? It's only a matter of time. Now, as that 2033 figure gets closer, don't you think that the mainstream are going to have to start re-evaluating the way they treat this subject? Because soon enough, they're going to get this definitive, yes, we've got an extraterrestrial signal, it's confirmed, it's regular, we can prove it through science, blah, blah, blah. They're going to have to re-evaluate everything. But what I suspect will happen is that many years before that, a good 10 years before that, they will start to think, it's only a matter of time. I've spoken to mainline news reporters when they've been interviewing me, and privately they'll say, yeah, we're just waiting for the announcement on Mars that they found microscopic life. What do you think about that? As soon as mainstream reports all over the world that they found microscopic life on Mars, no matter what life it is, that age-old question, is there life out there? Answered, yes. Then the argument will be about sentient life, intelligent life. But they've already set the clock ticking, haven't they? Tick-tock, tick-tock. They've set it running because by 2033 they're saying they will find an intelligent, extraterrestrial, technological signal. So they're going to have to start changing their attitudes. So as soon as, say, we get a Mars announcement, then the arguments against UFOs and distances start to disintegrate. It's the first brick in the dam starts to come out and the water starts trickling through. Because they can't sustain the argument much longer as soon as that happens. Because that age-old question, is there life out there, is answered. And what it'll basically say is that 2 planets going around our sun, 2 of 9, and what they now know is that for every star that there is, and when you can't even get your head around the vastness of space, or the vastness of the number of galaxies, nobody can get their head around that. But if you just try to extrapolate some figures, it's just billions and billions and billions of planets capable of supporting life. Because around every star, every sun is a star, you've got at least 8 to 10 planets. Of those, maybe 2 or 3 have got the exo conditions, not too hot, not too cold, extrapolate, nobody just can't handle it. And the argument against distance is ludicrous, because 500 years ago, it would have taken us forever to go from one country to another. Now we can fly there in minutes. So technology changes. Where are we going to be in 50 years from now? Look at the technological changes just in 100 years, just in my lifetime. Who'd have thought we'd have a mobile phone that was more powerful than the Apollo program? Just in your pocket. That you can watch live TV on your Sky Go and your football matches on your phone. They're so powerful. Technology is changing at a pace almost beyond what we can comprehend. And who knows what's going on in secret labs that are still 15 years before the release to the public. So something has to change in that equation. Perhaps some people say disclosure is already done. A lot of countries have released files. But that's a con. It's a temporary con. The British have been releasing files. Well, they released a batch for about 4 years, saying that was everything. And then John Burroughs, who was one of the Rendlesham witnesses, he managed to, 18 months after they said that it revealed everything, has got someone in Whitehall to make a mistake and say, well, actually, we've got another 18 policy files. So they lied to us then. What else are they lying about? Well, the stuff that they released, was it top-level stuff, top-secret stuff? No, was it hell? It nearly all correspondence, boring, repetitive. In amongst it, there's some nuggets. You know, but it's low-level stuff that's been released around the world. The MOD closed the UFO reporting desk in December 2009. Suddenly, after 50-odd years of being in existence, the public could report, and reports would go in and end up in this reporting facility at the MOD. Suddenly they closed it. They said, oh, we'll cost cutting, save £55,000. There was only one person in that office. That's how much time they devoted to the subject. One person, 55 grand, and they said it was a cost cutting exercise. Well, the real reason, it's been admitted by Nick Pope, who worked at the desk between 91 and 94, is not about money. It was that they were getting bogged down in freedom of information reports about UFOs. That's all they were getting. Taking up so much of their time, they didn't want to do it. So how do you get rid of the problem? Just close it. The press went along with it. So it was a temporary solution to get rid of the UFO problem. But it can't go away, because that ticking time clock of mainstream, they put themselves onto a clock that they can't get off. It has to come. Whereas in the past, people have said disclosure in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. They can't do that now because technology is moving at a pace. And if they really are in mainstream science going to get an intelligent signal by 2033, this is when something's got to give. They're running into a brick wall. They can't avoid it. The media can't avoid it. It's going to happen sooner or later. We are going to have to deal with ET contact. And we can't shelve it for much longer. If there was disclosure tomorrow, what effect would it have? Probably have a major effect on religions, religious faith, whatever denomination. It could cause economic crisis around the world. How would it affect the armaments industry? Another reason why the likes of America will never go public willingly is because does Barack Obama want to stand up and say, well, actually, we've known about these things for 60 odd years, and they can come and go with impunity. Our planes can't get near them. We did try shooting them down at one time, but they killed about 10,000 pilots during the early 50s. General Chidlaw actually said that there was a policy in the early 50s to bring down UFOs in the American airspace. And in the process, they lost around 10,000 pilots. Not widely reported. So that doesn't happen anymore. So basically, they come and go with impunity. Okay? But it's going to cause shockwaves. Why? Because the public are going to go, what? You've lied to us for 60-odd years? People have committed suicide because they've been ridiculed. Policemen, pilots have committed suicide because they've had a sighting and gone public, and then got ridiculed, lost their job, lost their lives, lost their families. People have died because of this policy of suppression. Now that's serious. And somebody has to account for that. So how do we deal with it when it does come out? Well, there's going to be a lot of public backlash against governments for lying. Obviously, you've been deceived. And also, equally, I anticipate with the media, because the media have colluded and allowed governments to get away with us for so long. So there's going to be a backlash. But how do you deal with that backlash? Well, they dealt with a horrendous situation in, I thought, was an incredible way. Yeah? It could have been a bloodbath when South Africa got rid of apartheid. But they didn't. Nelson Mandela says, no, okay, they were part of a system. There's no point in just going after these people willy-nilly and shooting them else. We'd know better than them. So they had truth and reconciliation. So wouldn't it be nice if we got Dick Cheney, all these top people who know really what's going on about UFOs, and get them to admit their involvement and then saying, okay, you've told the truth, you've clean slate, now we move on. but you will not be empowered in a future world. Yeah? Because what I anticipate would happen is a future world. This book, by Richard Dolan and Bryce Sable, talks about it. Post-disclosure world. Okay? Now, let's just imagine a post-disclosure world. Do you think UFO researchers would get a look in? Top people in the field? Do you think we'd get involved in any negotiations with perhaps ET if there was a contact going on? No, probably not, because we're just low level, we don't have the need. No, we're just nobles. The powers that be would try to make it better for themselves. They won't want to lose power. They won't want to lose power. They will try to do anything to keep them in power. So it's all the secret world people who've been really doing research on this in the military for years. They'd come out and say, oh, well, actually, we've been dealing with this race of ET for years and we've got certain protocols worked out. Those people would suddenly come out of the woodwork. And I don't think we'd get a look in, although we probably would become quite famous. Because everybody would want to talk to you. Because you booked the system, you tried to tell the truth. So we might get rich in the media, but we wouldn't probably have a hand in actually shaping the future. Unless. Now, just before we talk about the unless, Roberto Panotti came up with a strategy for dealing with contact. Anybody that contacts me, I'll give them a link to that. Steve Bassett, with his work with the citizens' hearings at the National Press Club. AJ Javan, a friend of mine, he's the top Brazilian researcher. Now, they have done things that most countries have never done. They have managed to get a regular protocol worked out with the Defence Minister of Brazil and the defence and the top military officials, Air Force officials, and they, about every 4 months, they will sit down at a meeting with them, like a legitimate, recognising the seriousness of the subject. And that's what we need to do, a realisation that there is something going on, and let's talk over the way forward, because there are implications of contact. And this is the implications of contact. Mankind's agenda on contact might not be their agenda. And if you think about the UFO history, there's probably lots of species coming here. Some may already live here in the deep oceans. We only know 1% of the oceans. We know more about the moon's surface and Mars' surface than we do about what's down in the sea. And how many UFOs are seen coming in and out of water? Lots, all around the world. So, the real reason is we might have an agenda. Barack Obama, say if it happened tomorrow, would have an agenda. They would try to control the situation. But would they agree with that? We don't know. And how do we know that they don't watch us from afar and say, I'd rather work with that guy, because these guys are liars. So that's maybe where researchers might get called in a contact strategy, because they're setting an agenda that says, you've had this problem for 60 years, you've lied about us, blah, blah, blah. But it also has further implications. Because not all ETs seem to be very nice. Those of you who have suffered an abduction scenario, and I do believe abductions are real, because they're reported worldwide, they're reported even in the third world, where there is no access to TV, radio, but they all kind of describe the same thing. Animal mutilations. There are a few human mutilation cases. If you think of Richard D. Hall, he made a documentary about human mutilations up on Cornwall, up on the Brecon Beacons. Right? So whoever's doing that, and that's a worldwide phenomenon, it's not just sheep, it's every country, nobody can explain it, surgical precision, no blood, genital material taken usually, but no blood. Predators won't go near them. It's a worldwide phenomenon. It's not just sheep, it's dogs, cattle, deer. There's every kind of animal. Even sea lions, seals. If you think of David Caton, he did a report, and in fact in the next issue of the magazine, issue 12 due out at the end of April, another reason he's doing an update because there's a number of seal reports. It was mentioned in issue 10, I think. But basically, there's a number of seals that have been found that are stripped from the neck and it's in a precise place, and it's like when you butter a knife and you run it through and it rolls into a curl, it strips in a circular fashion, taking a big neat strip out. And they're trying to say, he's got a response from the fishing authorities saying no, they think it's a seal balloon that's stripping it exactly at the same point and stripping it neatly and evenly. And you just don't know that. But that's what the world that we live in. Alright, so it happens in the sea as well. So the extraterrestrial agenda. We don't know their agendas, not in the public domain. Now don't forget, the secret world may have had engagement, contact with this for a long time. They may have worked out protocols, but in the public domain, we're ignorant. We don't know. That may be, because of this, animal mutilations, human mutilations, abductions, maybe that is why it is still secret. Maybe the governments do know something that they're not telling us for our own reasons. You can't rule that out. That they are doing it in our best interest because it's too horrifying what they know. That's a possibility. That kind of contact may not be in the best interest of mankind. I certainly think there's a case for saying that there's a lot of good, good races out there that come and go. Benevolent. That's not right, is it? That's the one. Right. I certainly think over the years there has been a strong indication of an interest in what happens to us because they turn up, they surveil our nuclear bases. The Rendlesham Forest incident was really about nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons inspection over 3 successive nights. Why? Because at the time of world crisis, there were far more nuclear weapons there than anywhere else in Europe, and not one of them had been declared in any of the armaments agreements. That's why UFOs appeared at Rendlesham Forest over 3 successive nights, because there were more nuclear weapons there, and it was a time of world crisis because the Polish Solidarność movement were just about to go into Poland, were running in Poland, and hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops, bear in mind it was a Soviet state, were massing on the borders, ready to go into Poland at the time of Rendlesham Forest. So at a time of world destabilisation, who wonders why they wouldn't think, what the hell are they doing there? That's going to destabilise this planet. They shouldn't have been there. So again, we don't know their agendas, but I do think the vast majority are probably fine. But there certainly is an agenda that says some are not. A lot of people have speculated. Tim Good will say that from his information, bear in mind he knows a lot more than me, he's been doing it many, many years, that there is a 100-year ongoing programme that's related to this, that they are conducting, ET's conducting. Now whether they're making hybrids to invaders or whatever, but there's something going on. This is related to hybrids of some kind. Right. So the clock is ticking. And on the end of that, my lecture comes to an end. Sleep well in your beds tonight. Do you feel safe now? Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, if anybody's got questions, please raise your hand.
Okay. It's more of an observation.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with the. We live in the Goldilocks zone, but I'd like to know that someone's definitely been eating our porridge. With regard to disclosure, I think it's going to be I think personally it's going to be a bit like the Soviet Union collapsing. It's not going to come down voluntarily. It's going to be pulled out by us, brick by brick.
But then I think it will happen quickly, because that's what happened with the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Once the Berlin Wall went, it then collapsed pretty quickly.
And I think with the disclosure project...
Yeah, I think what they say. Yeah, and that's why I say about the brick coming out.
Yeah.
But once that first brick's out, yeah, there's life out there. Yeah. The arguments against ET and UFOs kind of goes out the window if you think of the bigger picture. Next.
There's been a lot on the internet about Putin revealing stuff about ETs in Russia, like Russia's very open about it. Is this true or false?
Well, I would say that that's probably just a story. That's not to say that that Russia will not be a big player in all this, because a lot of people don't realise that even during the height of the Cold War, they had a phone. I don't know what colour it was, but they talked to each other about UFOs. Why? Because they didn't want to trigger World War III by thinking it was a ballistic missile that somebody else had sent.
But the same day that that plane went missing, the original plane, there was a
Yeah,
massive
317.
UFO over in Ukraine, and that was all over the internet as well, and I can confirm that was
I'd like to see more evidence of that. I'm not saying you're wrong, but what I'm saying is this is where we come into the world of the internet. There are so many bogus websites out there, so many bogus CGI clips out there, you know, that it's very difficult to, if you're not that familiar with the subject, to pick your way through the wheat from the chaff. And there's a lot of sensationalist stuff out there, but unless it's backed up with a name, a scientist, I generally don't take it too seriously.
Well, I was at another conference up in Blackpool, and they actually showed footage of what happened when those UFO were seen, and it was all on a radar screen that someone had got, and they were confirming this was
Well, I remember that. What I would have to say about that plane is it's an incredibly fascinating case, and there probably is a mundane non-UFO explanation to it, but you certainly can't rule it out, because historically some UFOs on radar have been seen to go over planes and merge with the same radar target and disappear, like the Frederick Valentich in 1978 over New Zealand. There was an earlier one in 1951, a pilot, I think over Canada. He had a UFO go over it, disappear, plane and the radar merged together. Don't forget, there is the famous 1973 helicopter sighting where 4 people, a military crew in a helicopter, were effectively taken up in a tractor beam. Sounds all kind of Star Trek-y, but they were drawn up into the air by a UFO, and it was drawing them up, and they went up something like 1,000 feet, and then the beam went off, and then they got the flight back. But that was witnessed on the ground as well, and it was on radar. And so there's obviously technologies out there that they can do probably whatever they want to do. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's a book come out from the University of Colorado,
Condon Committee.
and they were talking about disowning like UFOs because they picked about 20 cases out.
They chose 117 cases out of 10,000.
There's about several of them they couldn't explain, didn't they?
Well, no, they couldn't.
No,
but they deceived the public.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. The book was made to.
Edward Condon was a noted physicist, and he was chosen, and he was a really noted physicist. But he said, prior to the release of the Condon report, which was supposed to be like a 3-year study, he actually said at a meeting, and it was recorded verbatim. He says, "I'm only doing this basically because they've asked me to do it, and as soon as we, you know, it's going to be like a negative conclusion." So this was an attempt by the American authorities to get rid of the public interest in the subject. And it worked, because the Condon Committee, most of the time, you'd release a book with a conclusion at the end. Do you know what they did? They wrote a massive thick book, and they gave the conclusion in the first paragraph of the first chapter. Why? Because they knew that all the press were waiting. What's the result? Do you believe or don't you? First paragraph, first line. Yeah, no, we think they can all be explained. Press go running out. Don't listen to the rest of the briefing or read the rest of the book. Because within that book, 20% of sightings were unidentified. Well, how can you have a negative conclusion if 20%, 1 in 5, were unexplained? And what you've got to understand about Project Blue Book, they had 10,000 cases to look at. They didn't look at the best 10,000, the best 1,000. They looked at just 117 cases, random. They didn't get the best 117 cases, and basically it was a foregone conclusion. The Condon Committee was a whitewash. Yeah? Nothing more than that, a whitewash.
It's just in terms of disclosure moving forward, you know, this process.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting the way you highlighted that with the massive information, say for the internet, you do need a point of reference, like something like what you're doing, for example.
That's what I'm trying to do. He's trying to say there is so much stuff out there.
Yeah.
How do you choose?
But what I was going to say was that, I mean, that's an interesting, for the internet, that's a great point of reference to focus people's minds with all this massive information. In terms of general media and entertainment and all of that side of things, in terms of what people are confronted with, for me, the crucial point of reference in a similar way is going to be cinema.
Oh yeah.
That's why I'm interested to know, particularly a documentary that I think Stephen Bassett was proposing, Truth Embargo.
Yeah. I showed the poster for it. Yeah.
That's the point of reference that people latch onto as that moves people's mindsets forward.
Absolutely.
You know, it's not just any DVD documentary which gets lost.
No, it has to be
But it
mainstream.
has to be cinema.
Yeah, cinema.
Because that's what people record in their minds.
That's right. It's a popular medium,
Yeah.
and it's a very
So
powerful
I was
medium.
interested to know, I haven't caught up with certain stuff lately, but is he moving forward with that truth embargo after all the hearings you had?
Yeah, no, I think they basically ran out of money. He was given $1.5 million to set up the citizens' hearing. But if you think about it, he was flying people in from all around the world. It lasted a full week, 5 full days. It was a massive undertaking. He had people from about 14 different countries. And that's where the $1.5 million source. I think it was a guy called Thomas Clearwater gave him the money. And he was also supposed to cover the costs of the Truth Embargo documentary that was going to come out of it. But the last I heard was that they ran out of money and they were trying to raise money to finish the Truth Embargo. It is coming, but it's just probably a year, 2 years behind.
If it went out, I think it would move everything.
Well, unless it gets a major cinema release, which is a debatable question.
It has to be cinema release. Yeah.
It has to be a cinema release, which is one of the reasons why I was so keen to get the Reynolds from Forest story out there, because there is so much good evidence for that if you could tell it in a way for cinema, you'd get so many people coming out of that cinema going, this was real.
Yeah, because with cinema you can't bury it. There's so many people interested in recording films that come out, and you know, it's not buried like it could be buried if it's a DVD documentary or something.
Okay, next question.
No, I just thought of something. There is a friend of mine who runs the Conference for Consciousness and Human Evolution. The Conference for Consciousness and Human Evolution in London once a year. And I don't know if anyone's heard of Teal Scott. If that's anything that this sort of group would know about. She's a very conscious, young, attractive, sexy woman who is very enlightened and very conscious. And people like her are attracting a lot of interest from young people. And for her, you know, just being conscious, UFO would absolutely come into the realm of everything.
Absolutely.
You know,
because we're just beginning to understand consciousness.
It's a bigger picture.
Absolutely.
And that's why, you know, UFOs are one part
Of a big picture.
A huge picture of people becoming more conscious.
I look at it that we're like ants on the ground. We're only just discovering the power of consciousness. We're really on our first stages of technological awareness of consciousness and its implications. And even now, people talking about, you know, what the bleep. My daughter got involved in what the bleep, and I met the lady. Was it Lynn McTaggart?
Lynn McTaggart.
Yeah.
She is actually at the conference every year. She speaks.
Yeah, well, I've been to that
Doctors
one
don't
once.
tell you. Yeah.
But I'd like to speak there. But basically, it's a close correlation. But what science is realising now is that quantum mechanics can literally do anything. The power of the mind is changing everything. And they're saying eventually that, as daft as it sounds, you won't teleport, you'll just use the power of the mind. But we're literally just ants. We're so down on the primitive level. You know, there might be some people who will well up on it. I certainly am. But what I'm saying is that we are really just scratching the surface of our cosmic awareness and how it all relates and how travel can be, and how we interact with whatever's out there. I certainly
And we
believe
have to do it ourselves. We have to stop watching TV and we have to start eating.
Well, it's not a question of stop watching TV, it's just being aware of what TV does and what they're trying to do.
We get so programmed that people don't know what they don't know. So if you can cut it out for a year, you will become a very different form of
I couldn't knock out Match of the Day. So.
I mean, the violence,
Is that it?
look at sugar.
Right, okay, I'll now hand you back to Katrine.
Okay, so a big thank you to Gary. And Ben, so just to let you know that I'm going to try and organise another conference at the end of the summer, and people have sort of said they'd like to meet more regularly, so I'll try to put maybe just some evening talks with one speaker, you know, some little things together. And we're going to do a UFO, so I'll be in touch with Gary, and we're going to do another conference, just Gary. next year. So yeah, we'll chat about that and I'll let you all know. So some of you might not be on my mailing list. If you're not, there should be a sheet. It'll be in the sort of dining room area where all the biscuits are and everything. Get your email down on there. Please write clearly, because so many times I just get muddled. So.
Anybody wants to see me about subscribing to the magazine, come and see me in the room next door. I've got plenty of applications.
And don't really have to rush off. Please carry on, enjoy chatting and stuff. All right, bye. Nice to see you all.
Fantastic.
Yeah.